Hi all, welcome to another episode of Labbing It. In today's video, we're going to perform an in-place upgrade from Veeam 11 to Veeam 12. So we're going to do this all on the same server, and we're also going to migrate away from SQL Express, which is what we're currently using. That's how it was installed originally, and we are going to migrate that to a PostgreSQL database, which is new and available in version 12. Once that's all complete, we're going to have a quick look and review the backup chains. I've had a lot of feedback from customers. In Veeam 12, they provided some new features where we can move uh, our backups from one repository to another, and we can also move virtual machine workloads from one backup job to another backup job. And I get a lot of feedback from people saying, well, I've done the upgrade to 12, but some of my workloads I can move and some I cannot. So we're going to have a quick look and review the different scenarios of why you can and why you can't move things and show you how to sort that out. So let's jump into the lab and we'll get started. Okay, so here we are in our version 11 server. There's not too much that we need to do really in order to start the upgrade process. There's a couple of there's some checklist guidelines on the Veeam website. You also want to make sure that you're on a compatible version to be upgrading from. I think 11.x to 12 is fine, but double check the Veeam website anyways. But the upgrade's quite straightforward. Um, so the first step is just to disable all our backup jobs. This is obviously required, especially if we're running any sort of SQL processing jobs that continually run. I'm not in my environment, but probably in many others they are. So disable all the jobs. And before I do any upgrade, I always like to do it's recommended, do a configuration backup as well. So I'll do that right now. Just be mindful that part of this process to migrate to PostgreSQL, this backup that we're creating in version 11 is actually not going to be supported to import into the version 12 or into PostgreSQL. We actually need to be on Veeam 12 and then do another configuration backup. So this is purely just for the upgrade process. So we'll just let that run. I'm actually backing this backup's actually occurring on the very same server. That might not be something you'd want to do in your environment. You probably want to back it somewhere else on a different repository. But for the sake of the lab, it's all on the same server. So that's all good. I'll double check that I can see it. So under the Veeam config backup, and there it is. They've just created this one at 3 p.m., which is the time right now. So no issues there. Now to access the software, just log on to the Veeam website, find Veeam 12, and you can download it. You just need a Veeam account. I've already pre-downloaded it. It's just a big 10 gig ISO. Veeam, got a lot of ISOs in here, but it's this file just here, Veeam 12. I'm just going to mount that. And I'm going to close the console because that's definitely going to be required because that gets upgraded as well. And I always run everything as administrator, so I'm just going to do that. And this process is pretty darn straightforward. Upgrade Veeam backup replication. Can't do anything else. I don't have Enterprise Manager. The console will be upgraded after the VBR server is upgraded. The console is on here, but once this has been upgraded, if you've got other consoles installed on other machines, you'll need to go and upgrade those as well. Click on Upgrade Veeam Backup and Replication, and we start the process. This is really straightforward. I've actually done, I just went back in time and I just actually did this process previously just to make sure that it's all going to work as expected. I did have a slight little issue, but we'll go over that when we get to it. But it's nothing. It's not a showstopper or anything like that. I think it's just something relevant to my environment, not an issue with the Veeam upgrade process itself. I'll just pause it here. Okay, that initialization process took longer than I expected. That took a few minutes. But anyways, we're at the license agreement, so if we're happy with that, we can just accept. Bit of an overview of exactly what's going to happen. So the catalog, the replication server, and console will all be upgraded to version 12. We also have an option here to automatically update the remote components. So that's just talking about, your repository servers, any other servers that you might have in your environment that are applicable to an upgrade. I'm going to leave that unchecked for now. We'll have a look when we get into the console what needs to be upgraded. But otherwise, if you know what you're doing, you've done this 1,000 times before, you can just tick this box and all the components will get upgraded automatically. Upgrading the components doesn't force a reboot of any server or anything like that, so it is safe to do. But I'm just going to leave it off for now. Next. Update the license automatically. So we're using version 11. So version 11 and 12 uses the same licensing format, so we don't need to upgrade our license or anything like that from Veeam. Our existing license file will work just fine. Next. And it's just going to do a quick configuration check. I'm just going to give it a second. Okay, no, that was quick. So we'll continue to use the local system account, which is the recommended way, but if you need to use a service account for Veeam, you can nominate that here as well. You might already be using a service account, so you just use the same one. But I'm already using local system account, and that's how I'm going to keep it. So here is kind of slightly important. We don't need to actually do anything here because we're not actually changing anything with the database. It's a SQL Express database. It's still going to be a SQL Express database after this this upgrade, but we do have an opportunity here if we actually want to move it from one SQL server to another. Note that we can't change the engine to PostgreSQL. It has to be a SQL server. So that's part of this process that we need to do first before we can migrate over to PostgreSQL. So I don't need to do anything here. Everything is exactly how it was for the initial install of version 11. So the local SQL Express database for Veeam SQL 2016 is going to be upgraded for Veeam 12. So I'm just going to click next. And it's just telling us that it's going to upgrade the selected database. So it can tell, it knows that there's an existing database there. We're going to upgrade it, and that's fine. If you nominated a different SQL server, you probably wouldn't get this. It would just be migrated over to a new SQL instance. That's about it. So pretty straightforward for the upgrade. Very, very simple, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to hit the upgrade button. This actually takes a mountain of time, so I'm not going to time lapse. I usually like to use a time lapse. I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to do an upgrade. I'm going to pause it and let the process go right through, and then I'll join back to the session once it's complete. And we're done. I think that took about 20 minutes in my time. So let's hit finish. So we'll keep this open. And let's load up our console, now at Veeam Backup and Replication version 12. Nothing else changes in the way that we access it. It's pretty straightforward. Might just do a little pause here just in case this might take a couple of moments to, oh no, it's going to come up. No, don't worry about it. And yeah, look, the first thing it's going to ask us is to do the components update. And it's identified which servers that need to be updated. So it's actually this server itself, the VBR server, telling us that it's going to update the mount server. What's that got there? Install a mount server, tape proxy, Veeam agent for Linux redistributable. There's an array of different things there that needs to update, so that's okay. It's pretty straightforward. This one's a little bit different. This is the Linux server that we've got in our environment. It's a hardened repository, and I suspect what's going to happen here, it's going to ask me to provide some fresh credentials to log into, because I use the single-use credentials when I set this up to make this a Linux hardened repository. I've got a feeling that it's lost that connection and it's going to ask me for the single use credentials again. I'm pretty sure that's what I've read. So I'm going to hit apply, and yep, okay, single use credentials. Yep. I've seen this before actually because I've done this a few times, so that's pretty straightforward. So you'll need to know what those are, the credentials to use on your Linux hardened repository. So I'm just going to go set user, single use credentials again. I know what the user account is. I've got this was created in a previous video. I might when I finish this video off, I'll put it in the I'll put it a link in the description. And okay, and it's now just going to apply those updates. I might definitely just pause it here and we'll come back. Actually, I might just quickly time lapse it. This will only take a couple of minutes, so I'll do a quick time lapse. Too easy. Okay, so that's all done, and click finished. And if we look in our backup infrastructure tab, we can see probably a few things here that's not quite right, but now sorted out. So if we didn't update those components, they would stay in a sort of an error state or a disconnected state. So that looks like it's okay. Everything's back to normal. I don't have much inventory anyways for this Veeam environment. It's quite small. But everything's all connected. So if backups were to initiate right now, everything would run normally. So that's in the simple upgrade process to version 12. But the next thing I want to do is now upgrade from the SQL Express database, which is installed on this server, and migrate that across to PostgreSQL. What you'll find in Veeam literature, they'll probably tell you the best way to do this this migration is actually to spin up a brand new Veeam 12 server. So a new virtual machine, install Veeam 12, but install it with PostgreSQL. And all you would do then is come to this original server, do a configuration backup, and then migrate it into the new server, and away you go. But I've also had a lot of customers though that have come to me and say, how do we do this if we want to just keep the same server? We don't want to build a new server, new IP address and all the rest of it. So this is the method to do that. It's fully supported. There's no issues here, but it's just a little bit of a slight manual process to get the job done. So let's do that next. So the process here is all we need to do is manually install PostgreSQL on this server. Because this is already an installed version of Veeam, and it was installed with SQL Express, and we can quickly log into SQL here. I installed Server Management Studio on this server just so that we could log in, have a quick look. Here we have the Veeam backup server database, all in SQL, but running SQL Express. For those that are not aware, so SQL Express is not necessarily the recommended practice from Veeam to run your Veeam database, but many of my clients use it basically because their environment is not big enough to warrant a full-blown version of SQL to be installed, a full license version. There's some documentation on the Veeam website, but if you're under a certain size environment, then SQL Express will suffice. But SQL Express does come with some limitations. So it comes with some CPU and memory limitations, but probably more importantly, it comes with storage limitations. So your database can only be up, I believe it's only 10 gig in size. And for a sizable environment, you might find that your SQL database could potentially, your Veeam database could potentially exceed that 10 gig, and then would have some issues. So PostgreSQL is open source, it's free, and it removes those limitations. So there are no memory constraints, CPU constraints, or size constraints. Or there probably are, but it's nothing that's going to affect our Veeam environment, and it's fine for enterprise sort of grade environments as well. But depending on your organization, you might be happy to run a full-blown SQL Server instance and keep it that way. And if that's the case, then that's more than fine. That's probably, if anything, the best solution if you can afford it and you're a big enough of an organization to warrant it. So, but let's get started. We'll close out of this. Fortunately, the ISO, the Veeam Backup and Replication 12 installation comes with the Postgre installation. So if this was actually going to be installed on a brand new server, it would install PostgreSQL right from these files, and we should see those in this folder here, PostgreSQL. So here's 15.1. So that's the version that I'm going to install. If you are doing a manual install, at the time of this video, 15.4 is available. But just check the system requirements. So I'm actually running this on a Windows Server 2012 R2 server. So 15.4, I don't believe is supported on a 2012 R2. I think you need 2016 and above. So 15.1 is fine, but any version of 15 is supported by Veeam as long as your OS supports that version of PostgreSQL. But 15.1 is going to be fine for us. So I just come in here and run the setup. And just for full disclosure, I am no PostgreSQL master or anything like that. I followed a guide on a Veeam blog, which I'll post in the description, the link. I just followed that pretty much to a T. And pretty much everything's just the default anyways. The only thing we don't need this stack builder. Not exactly sure what the stack builder does. I think that's got something to do with drivers and stuff like that. We don't need it for this implementation. And everything else should be fine. There's a super user password. So just need this. So this is for the Postgres instance, I suppose. That's the PostgreSQL equivalent to a SQL instance. This is what's by default is going to be installed. This is the default port that PostgreSQL uses. I'll leave it as default locale. It doesn't really matter. You can change this to whatever you want, but honestly, it's not going to make a difference to the installation. And just go through with the install. And done. And we click finish. Then we just need to do some basic configuration. So we need to load up PG admin, which I think is again equivalent to the SQL Studio Manager. So just run that up. And all we really need to do here is just create an account. We don't need to create the database or anything like that. We'll get Veeam to do all that as part of the migration process from SQL to PostgreSQL. So this is the password that we gave in the setup. Again. And all we need to do is just open up our logins and create a new login. It's going to call it Veeam. And on just apply a password. No expiry. And it's just to set the privileges. The documentation that I read is I think we can turn everything on except for these: create roles, initiate streaming, replication, and backups. We don't need those, but the other four we leave on. And we hit save. And that's it. The PostgreSQL server is actually ready to go. when we do the migration of the configuration database, as part of that process, it will create a new database, a new Veeam database, and that will post it into here, and we'll see that after the fact. So that ends this component. So now we'll start the actual migration. So let's close this. Our jobs are already disabled, so that's okay. I want that to be the case. What I'm going to do is create a new configuration backup in version 12. Important to note, as part of the migration process, we want to enable encryption. Enabling encryption means that, if I just click out of here, it means that all the passwords stored in our credentials, our credential manager, is going to be migrated as well, all the usernames and passwords. If we don't encrypt the configuration backup, then we'll need to input all the passwords again manually. That might be okay for some, but if you don't want to have that hassle, encrypt this backup, and that will do all the process for us. So this should only take a couple of seconds, and we'll verify that it's actually happened by opening up the repository, config backup, and we'll now see one marked 348. This is the one that we created before the upgrade. Here's our new one at 348. So this is essentially a Veeam 12 configuration backup. Doesn't really look like it's any different to the rest of them, but that's the one that we need to note, and that's the one that we need to use for restoration. Okay. So the best way to do this is just to close out of our console, and Veeam has an executable called configuration restore. We'll just open that up. And what we are, I should never do that. I've got a habit of just moving the window just slightly across, and it causes this screen tear, which I really hate. I don't know why I do it, just a habit. Let's go to migrate. So we are looking to migrate the database, not to restore it. Next. Backup repository to where this configuration backup lives is actually this server. We could nominate another repository if it lives somewhere else, but it is on this server. It's actually in this actual specific repository. Remember that configuration backup files can only be stored on a simple repository, not in a scale out repository. So that's why we only see this option here, not our scale out repository. Go browse and D drive backups, Veeam config backup, melvbr. And here is the file that we created just a couple of minutes ago. And we'll use that for our restore. So click open, and it will go and analyze the file. It'll tell us a bit about what's going on in this file. All okay with this. This is the encryption password. We need to just punch that in. So this way, all the usernames and passwords that we have in our credential manager will come across. And this is the most important part here. So now we get to choose PostgreSQL. And I don't think, I've not had any luck using the server name and the port number. I'll just try. So we've got to put in the credentials, which is what we created in the PG admin. See if it connects. Yeah, it always fails. I think there's some documentation around this. I don't think it's even, just see if it works with the fully qualified domain name. Doesn't like it. But it seems to work with localhost or 127.0.0.1, the loopback address. So see how that goes. Yeah, so that always works. I mean, it's not a big deal. Works fine. says that the Veeam backup database doesn't exist on this server, so it's going to be, or on this, a PostgreSQL database doesn't exist. So we're going to proceed with creating a new one. Now, I just mentioned a little bit a while ago that I have a small little issue when I do this restoration, and for some reason, when the session history is checked, so this tells us the what's passed, what's failed in our console. This doesn't work. This bit here does not convert for some reason. Now, I suspect it's definitely something to do with my environment, because when I look at other videos and other blogs, they have this ticked and it works fine. So I assume that it is supposed to work. Actually, as a matter of fact, if you look on the Veeam official Veeam website and you have a look at this conversion process, this is actually unchecked, but it doesn't say why. It just is unchecked. So I'm just going to uncheck it. If I check it, basically I'll go to the restore and it look like it's about to complete. It gets about 90% of the way and then it just fails on the last bit. It just rolls back the procedure to the original database. So I'm just going to leave it unchecked and just go with these options and click restore. And this process doesn't take too long, it just takes a couple of minutes. I've only got a small database. It's got to stop all the Veeam services. I don't have the console open or anything, so let it stop the Veeam services. And we'll get a new dialog box that shows the process of the migration. Just give it a second, and then I might just time lapse the restore process. Yeah, let's do that. All done, and now we click next. Here we can verify our credentials, make sure that they've come across. I'm not going to worry about it too much. If there are any issues with the credentials, I'll update accordingly. I've got some cloud credentials here. I was just testing some AWS access a little while ago, so that's why that's there. And now it's time to get those services back up and running. So the migration is completed successfully, and we can launch the user interface. And I've got the good old screens here. That's just part of my lab environment running on Windows 2012 R2. But now we're all back up and running, and doesn't appear to be any issues. Sometimes I see infrastructure components disconnected after a migration, not just with my testing in this lab, but also with customers. And usually the quick fix is to just restart the services again or just reboot the VBR server, and that usually fixes it. So that process is complete. So now we are on PostgreSQL, and we can do a quick verification test. There's probably a few ways to do this. I'm just going to open up the registry. I just opened it up prior just so I could find it quickly, but we have in the Veeam backup and replication key, we see under database configurations, PostgreSQL, and we've got some information in here. So that tells us that we've configured for PostgreSQL. And what you can do now, which should be a pretty straightforward process, is to uninstall SQL Express. So if I look through here and I look for the Microsoft SQL 2016 here, and go remove. This will go ahead and pretty much uninstall the instance. It's usually straightforward. Select all, next. And remove. And that's it. Close. So SQL is gone. The database probably still on file, probably still in the folder structure, but everything's now migrated across to PostgreSQL. Everything's that needs to be uninstalled can be uninstalled. So the last thing that I want to have a quick chat about is the backup chain format. Most people get a little bit confused, or they've come to me and asked me why I can't use the new move functionality. So if we go and have a look in our current backups, and I'm just going to expand each of the 4 jobs that I have running. What we see automatically now, since we've upgraded to 12, is that we can move the backup. So this is doing is moving the entire backup from one repository to another. So if we clicked on move backup, it would say, tell us what repository you want to back that up to. Now I don't have anything else really to move it to at the moment, but if we did have another scale out repository or something like that, I could probably move it to that without any issues. And the same on this one, and the same on this one. But what new feature has come to light in version 12, which is really cool, is also the ability to move virtual machines from one backup job into another. Now, as you can see here, I don't actually have any move options for this workload as of yet. And if I look at these different jobs here, this one doesn't have it either. And this one doesn't have it either. These are agent backups down here. This will actually have a move option because all agent backups are individualized. So they have their own backup file and their own metadata file, which is what we're going to talk about in a second. So they move without any problem. So we can move the whole, we can move all the data for all these workloads from one repository to another, or we can actually move this this particular workload from one backup job to another. As you can see, destination backup job. I don't have another agent backup job to move it to. But people are confused because what we see here on this particular backup job is the ability to upgrade the backup chain format, which is something that I'd recommend, if it's available to you, to do it to all your backup jobs. So that's available, but on this one it is not, and on this one it is not. And the reason behind this is quite simple, and it's just the way that these workloads have been backed up onto the repository. So you can see here we've got 2 repositories. We've got the Veeam Hardened Repository, and we've got a standard Veeam repository. This is our Linux server, our Linux Hardened Repository, and this is actually just a local repository on this VBR server. And if we're just going to have a look at the difference between the 2, if we go into backup repositories, here's the Veeam repository, and we go into properties, and under the repository section, and we go into the advanced settings, we see that there is an option here for use per machine backup files. For this repository, it's been unchecked. So any backup jobs targeting this repository is not going to back up the workloads, the virtual machines, as individual machines on their own. They're all going to be tied up together in one backup file, and we can see this when we have a look at the file structure. So that's how that is. But on the Hardened repository, and I'll just go to the scale out, but the individual repositories have the same settings. But if I go to the scale out settings, which contains both of those repositories, we can see here that we do have the use per machine backup files checked. So any backup targeting this scale out repository, the workloads, the virtual machines, will be backed up into individual per machine backup files. And we can see that very clear when we have a look at the folder structure. So if we go back to here, and firstly we'll look at the Melbourne Simple Backups folder. And if I open up the files here and get our VBR server, which is this server, and go to Melbourne Simple Backups, we can see here there is one VBK file plus a bunch of incremental files and a single metadata file. This job has two virtual machines in it, but we can't see them. They're not individualized. They're all wrapped up and bundled into a single file. And the metadata file is in the same manner. So there are no individual metadata files for virtual machines. There's just one metadata file for all. This configuration is kind of the old configuration that kind of not really going to be used moving forward in version 12. If we have a look at immutable backups, which is on our Linux Hardened Repository, so let's go down here and find our Linux and expand it. This might just take a moment while it connects. And we go down to our folder where our backups reside, which is in a folder called MNT, Mount. And we just have a look at our repository, immutable backups. It's nothing in that folder, it must be in this folder. And we just go into here, immutable backups. So here we see each workload backed up in their own files. So meldc2 is a virtual machine. It's got its own VBK file and its own incrementals, and so does mel_subca. And we also see that there's an individual metadata file which looks after all these backup files. In this current state, we cannot use the move function. But what we can do is actually upgrade the chain so that each of these workloads has their own metadata file. So when we look back here at immutable backups and we right mouse click, we can see upgrade backup chain format. That's what that's going to do. It's going to split out that metadata file into individual workload metadata files. And once that's complete, then these virtual machines will have the ability to move from one backup job into another. But we notice here we don't have an upgrade option, and that's because it's in the old format. Because this repository is not using per machine backup files, and Veeam doesn't have a mechanism, and nor should it, to be honest, to actually split out a full backup file into individual workload backup files. So if we take another quick look, there's no process to split this out into individual backups. The only way to achieve it is to not only upgrade the repository to use per machine backup files, but start a brand new backup chain, so a new full backup. So even by ticking the box per machine backup files for the repository isn't going to change anything when the backup job next runs. Sorry, if I go back into here and have a look in here, even if we tick that box, it's not going to do anything. So there is a process to bring in these backup jobs or the backup files into the new format, but it's not as simple as right mouse clicking and doing an upgrade. So what we'll do first is let's update this backup chain. So just remember there was a single metadata file which looks after all the individual backup files for each workload in this backup job. So these two servers had their own VBK files and subsequent VIB files, but one metadata file. So if we go upgrade backup chain format and we go OK, This takes a couple of minutes, so I'll just quickly time lapse this video to completion. And now it's complete. So it's completed the upgrade process. It's just the warning message is just telling us that the backup job remains in a disabled state because they were already disabled. So I'll click close. Now, it doesn't seem like anything different from this point of view, but if we right mouse click here, now we see the move backup option, and now we have the ability to choose to move this particular virtual machine, this workload, from this backup, immutable backups, to another backup job. So for instance, the simple backup job. So that's all that upgrade chain is doing. And what we can see if we go back now to the file structure and we go back to our Linux repository where these files reside, and as you can see, this is not refreshed yet. This is how it looked previously. If I hit F5, this VBM file is probably going to disappear. Now we have metadata file for meldc2 and we have a metadata file for melsubca. So Veeam now has the capabilities to lift and shift a particular workload out of this backup and into another backup job. So, and that's all it will do. It will just move this. Well, it's a hardened repository, so it'll kind of copy for now and will delete after immutability expires, but it will move these files into potentially another repository, into another backup job. So we know that that's all completed successfully. So this has now got the new backup chain format that comes with version 12. So we can move the backup job from one repository to another, and now we can move the workload from one backup job to another. But for these ones with the old setup, there's not really much we can do with those, unfortunately. So the recommended practice, or the only way really to achieve this, is to detach the existing backups from the backup job. And that's a simple process. So we'll just go through it. Detach the job and go yes. So simple backups will disappear. As a matter of fact, I'll do it to this application aware backup job as well. Detach. And give that a second. Now it's gone. And you can see over here, they're now located in an orphaned group. So they're not deleted or anything like that. They're still available for restores if we need to, but they're now detached from the actual backup job. So all we need to do, go back into backup infrastructure and go to this Veeam repository and click, or rather check, the use per machine backup file. And we'll be done. Now bear in mind, this is going to cause an active full backup. So if you've got a large backup job that you need to update, make sure that you've got enough room in your repository to allow for it. So if we go back here, so that now they're detached. If we go to our backup jobs and if we ran, I'll just run one of these jobs for now. If I just click start, I don't even have to click active full now because it's going to automatically perform an active full because it doesn't have anything to look at here in the disk section. And if we open up the job and we just look at see what's happening with say mel root ca, resetting CVT per job settings for active full. So we know that it's going to build an active full backup. And just to verify, if we come back here and we go to Melbourne simple backups, actually probably go up to backups, because what will happen here, because we detached this from the backup job, that's this folder here, it's most likely going to create a secondary folder. And it may not be up to date just yet, so we'll just wait for the job to start processing the data, which looks like it is now. Okay, so let's go back to files. Hitting F5 a couple of times doesn't seem to do the job. Shouldn't do anything in this folder anymore. What should happen? We should get a secondary Melbourne Simple Backups folder, but I'm struggling to refresh. Oh, there we go. Right mouse click, refresh will do the job. F5 is useless. So now we can see Melbourne Simple Backups _1. And if we go in here, we can see that now it is backing up with the new format. So Melroot CA has its own VBK file and its own subsequent metadata file, same as Mel VCSA. And essentially what that will mean is that when we go here under disks again, and we have a look at Melbourne Simple Backups, we won't see it right now until the backup's complete, but when we do right mouse click, we will see an ability or see the option to move the backup, move the virtual machine from one backup job into another. So hopefully, I know that sounds a little bit wordy, but hopefully that explains kind of the process of those backup chains and why after you upgrade to version 12 you see options to move or you don't see options to move. It's really around the repository and how it's been configured. Most importantly, you'll see this upgrade backup chain option if your backup repository was configured with per machine backups. If it wasn't, like the Veeam repository, then you're going to have to start afresh by detaching the backups from the backup job and run a brand new backup job with the per machine backup checked. So that really concludes the upgrade process to version 12. So we've upgraded the Veeam server. So it's an in-place upgrade. We migrated from from SQL Express to PostgreSQL, and we've also taken a quick look at the at how the backup chains work and how we update them to the newest format. So hopefully that's been really helpful for you guys. Definitely please leave a comment or any information that you think is worthwhile for me adding to these videos. I really enjoy doing them, so if there's anything that you want to see, just let me know. All the information I'll try and put in the description as well. But for now, I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.